Yo, what's happening everyone? So I need to tell you about what went down on First Take this morning because honestly, I was completely caught off guard by where this conversation went and I'm still processing everything that was discussed. I had just finished reading about the New York Giants hiring Brian Callahan as their passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, made myself some coffee to think about how the coaching staff is coming together, turned on ESPN to catch First Take, and there were Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, and Mad Dog Russo getting ready to discuss the Giants and their offseason plans under new head coach John Harbaugh. But instead of just breaking down the Brian Callahan hire or talking about how experienced the coaching staff is becoming, they pivoted into this absolutely wild discussion about whether the Giants should be pursuing Kenneth Walker III, who just won Super Bowl MVP, to completely transform their offensive identity and give them the explosive playmaker they desperately need in the backfield. And man, the way this entire segment unfolded had me sitting there completely captivated because they were covering everything from the Giants' offensive struggles to their need for a true RB1 to whether trading significant assets for a Super Bowl MVP running back makes sense when you're trying to build around Jackson Dart. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there. Hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me, so do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. The show opened in this really excited way because instead of immediately jumping into the Kenneth Walker discussion, Stephen A. started by talking about how impressed he is with the coaching staff John Harbaugh is assembling in New York. He was talking about how Harbaugh brought in Matt Nagy as offensive coordinator, Greg Roman as senior offensive assistant, and now Brian Callahan as passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, and how all of these guys have head coaching or coordinator experience. Stephen A. was really emphasizing how this shows Harbaugh learned from his mistakes in Baltimore, where he apparently let things get out of control and didn't know what was happening in every position group. Shannon Sharpe immediately jumped in and started breaking down why having all this coaching experience matters for Jackson Dart's development. He was talking about how Dart is going to be surrounded by coaches who have worked with Peyton Manning, Joe Burrow, Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Alex Smith, and how that collective knowledge is going to accelerate Dart's growth. Shannon made this really compelling point about how rookie quarterbacks need great coaching, and the Giants are setting Dart up for success better than most teams do with their young signal callers. Mad Dog came in absolutely fired up, and he was yelling about how the Giants finally have a real head coach and a real coaching staff after years of mediocrity. He was talking about how Joe Judge was a disaster, how Brian Daboll ultimately failed, and how John Harbaugh represents a completely different level of organizational structure and experience. Mad Dog was really emphasizing how this is the most excited he's been about the Giants in years because they finally have adults running the organization. Stephen A. brought the conversation specifically to Kenneth Walker III, and this is where things really got interesting. He started explaining Walker's situation with the Seattle Seahawks and why he might actually be available despite just winning Super Bowl MVP. Stephen A. was talking about how the Seahawks have cap issues, how they might need to make tough decisions, and how trading Walker for massive draft capital could help them reload. He was really emphasizing how Walker is only 26 years old, entering his prime, and just put on one of the greatest Super Bowl performances in recent memory. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about why the Giants specifically need Kenneth Walker to fix their offensive identity crisis. He was explaining how the Giants have been searching for an offensive identity for years, how they don't have a true bell cow running back, and how their offense is too predictable right now. Shannon made this point about how when you have an elite running back like Walker, it opens up everything else in your offense, including the play action game and the deep passing game, and that's exactly what Jackson Dart needs. Mad Dog interrupted and started talking about what it would actually cost to acquire Kenneth Walker from the Seahawks. He was explaining how the Seahawks would probably want multiple first-round picks, how the Giants have the 5th overall pick in the draft, and how they could put together a package that makes sense. Mad Dog was making this argument about how sometimes you have to give up a lot to get a lot, and if the Giants are serious about winning with John Harbaugh, they need to be aggressive. Stephen A. came back and started discussing how Walker would specifically help Jackson Dart's development as a rookie quarterback. He was explaining how rookie quarterbacks succeed when they have strong running games that keep defenses honest, how play action becomes lethal when defenses have to respect the run, and how Walker's ability to catch passes out of the backfield would give Dart an easy outlet. Stephen A. was arguing that if you want Dart to succeed, you need to build the offense around a dominant running game, and Walker is the perfect guy to lead that charge. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the Super Bowl performance and why that elevated Walker's value. He was talking about how Walker absolutely dominated on the biggest stage, how he showed he can perform under immense pressure, and how that kind of clutch gene is exactly what a franchise like the Giants needs. Shannon was explaining how you can't teach clutch performance, and Walker has proven he has it when the lights are brightest. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the NFC East and why the Giants need to close the gap on teams like Philadelphia and Dallas. He was yelling about how the Eagles and Cowboys have had the Giants' number for years, how the division is brutal, and how adding an impact player like Walker would immediately make the Giants more competitive in those rivalry games. Mad Dog was making this point about how division games are physical battles, and having a bruising running back like Walker would help the Giants win those wars in the trenches. Stephen A. then shifted the conversation to talk about Matt Nagy and how Walker would fit into his offensive system. He was explaining how Nagy has struggled to create explosive running games throughout his career, but how having a talent like Walker would mask some of those weaknesses. Stephen A. was arguing that even if Nagy isn't the best play caller, having Walker in the backfield gives you a built-in advantage because defenses have to account for him on every snap. Shannon came back and made an interesting point about how adding Walker would impact the rest of the offensive weapons. He was talking about how the Giants have Malik Neighbors, who's an emerging star at receiver, and how having a dominant running game would create more one-on-one opportunities for Neighbors downfield. Shannon was explaining how offenses are most dangerous when they're balanced, and Walker would provide that balance that the Giants desperately lack. Mad Dog started getting animated again, and he was talking about John Harbaugh's track record with running backs in Baltimore. He was explaining how Harbaugh always had strong running games with guys like Ray Rice, Mark Ingram, and others, and how he clearly values that position. Mad Dog was making this argument about how Harbaugh isn't going to want to rely solely on a rookie quarterback. He's going to want a physical running game, and Walker is exactly the type of back Harbaugh has had success with. Stephen A. brought up the financial aspect of potentially trading for and paying Kenneth Walker. He was explaining how Walker is going to command a massive contract extension, how the Giants have cap space to work with, and how investing in a proven running back might be smarter than hoping to find one in the draft. Stephen A. was arguing that the Giants are in a unique position where they can afford to be aggressive, and Walker represents the type of move that shows you're serious about winning. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about the offensive line and how that connects to potentially adding Walker. He was explaining how the Giants just hired Mike Bloomgren as their offensive line coach, how they're clearly prioritizing the trenches, and how having a great offensive line makes any running back better. Shannon was making this point about how if the Giants invest in both Walker and their offensive line, they could have one of the most dominant rushing attacks in football. Mad Dog came back and started discussing the timeline of the Giants' rebuild and whether now is the right time to trade for a veteran like Walker. He was explaining how some people might say the Giants should wait until they're further along in their rebuild, but how having Walker now would accelerate the process and show Jackson Dart they're committed to winning. Mad Dog was passionate about how you can't just sit around hoping to get better. You need to make bold moves and add talent aggressively. Stephen A. then brought the conversation to the draft and how trading for Walker would impact their draft strategy. He was explaining how if the Giants trade the 5th overall pick for Walker, they wouldn't be able to draft a blue chip player, but how sometimes proven talent is better than potential. Stephen A. was arguing that the Giants need to decide if they want to gamble on a rookie or get a sure thing in Walker who just proved himself on the biggest stage. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the leadership aspect and what Walker would bring to the locker room. He was explaining how Walker is a Super Bowl champion who just won MVP, how he has that winning mentality, and how that would rub off on younger players like Dart and Neighbors. Shannon was making this point about how championship culture is built by adding champions, and Walker would instantly elevate the entire locker room. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the competitive balance in the NFC and why the Giants need to close the gap. He was explaining how teams like Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Detroit are loaded with talent and how the Giants need to make moves if they want to compete with those powerhouses. Mad Dog was yelling about how adding Walker would be exactly the type of statement move that shows the league the Giants are back. Stephen A started wrapping things up by talking about John Harbaugh's expectations for his first season. He was explaining how Harbaugh is 63 years old and doesn't have time to waste on a slow rebuild, how he's going to want to compete immediately, and how adding a player like Walker shows that urgency. Stephen A was arguing that Harbaugh didn't leave Baltimore to oversee a 5-year rebuild. He came to New York to win now.